The battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena.
The Canadian pension plan is performing so marvelously in the world. I don't even know if we need you up here. And nevertheless, that is the argument. And further, they digress, or they discuss a bit more, and they say, right now,
Well, thank you, Ross, very much for that kind introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's wonderful to see you all here. Can everybody hear me okay? No? All right, can you hear me now? I'll try and speak as loud as I can. How's it working? Can you hear me now? I don't know if I can put the mic any further down my throat, actually. In any case, I'll do my best to speak as loud as possible. And I did hear from someone earlier that apparently you can hear better on this side. I'm not really sure if that's true or not. But in any case, here we are. So, over the next 15 minutes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the Alberta budget. I want to talk to you about Bill 1, the Alberta Sovereignty Within the United Canada Act, as a segue into a discussion regarding the rationale and merits of an Alberta pension plan to be discussed by Tanner and Mitch following my presentation. Now, to begin with, just to get, so I can read the room here, how many people here, by a show of hands, are conservatives? All right. Now, the next question relates to, if you're a fiscal conservative, what it means is that you like small government, less governance, less regulation, less taxation, and a free market economy. How many people here are fiscal conservatives? All right, that brings me to the first point, the budget. As you know, the Alberta budget for 2025-2026 is estimated at $80 billion. And what is relevant to know about that particular budget is it's a deficit budget by $5.2 million. Now, I get it. You know, any budget, there's going to be a revenue stream and there's going to be an expenditure stream. My question to all of you is, how many here think that we have a revenue problem? Raise your hand. A couple. How many people think we have an expenditure problem? All right. So let me tell you why I think, give you some information about why I think what we really have is an expenditure problem. And we're going to look at that $80 billion budget. We're going to analyze it from the perspective of the elephant in the budget. That's the healthcare component. The healthcare component is $28 billion of the $80 billion. Now, you have to ask the question, is that reasonable? And let me give you a couple of facts, and then we'll see how reasonable everybody thinks it is. In 1995, the population of Alberta was 3.8 million people. Keep that number in mind. There were 5,000 employees for Alberta Health at that time. Fast forward to today, we have 4.8 million, just north of 4.8 million people. Just about a million, a little bit more than a million more than in 1995. How many people here know how many employees there are at Alberta Health Services? By the way, that's an oxymoron. But how many people here know what the answer is? It's 130,000 folks are on the payroll for Alberta Health. Does that even make sense to you? Of course not. It doesn't make sense. And so you have to ask the question, why is that? Is it possible that there might be fraud, waste, and abuse in the healthcare system? Having worked in it for 32 years, I can tell you that I know firsthand that there is fraud, waste, and abuse. The extent of fraud, I don't know. The extent of waste and abuse, inefficiency, is definitely there. Having said that, I don't want to be pejorative here, but I'd like to know how many people here are satisfied with Alberta Health Services? Raise your hand. Okay, I don't see anybody raising your hand, but you know, there are people in the audience, I'm sure, that have had pretty good care. Once you get into the system, you can get pretty high quality care. It's not consistent in every area, but that doesn't matter. Now, what I want you to think about is if there may be fraud, waste, and abuse in healthcare, what do you think is occurring in the other provincial departments? Do you think there could be some waste and abuse in those departments as well? Why this is relevant to talk about is because it's your tax dollars that go to pay for government services. And when those tax dollars are wasted as a result of abuse and mismanagement and inefficiencies in the system, what does that do? It compromises your sovereignty. What is sovereignty? It's self-governance. That's what the simple term. Sovereignty is self-governance. So what you are doing when you overpay as a consequence of fraud, waste, and abuse, you are losing incrementally some of your sovereignty. You're losing some of your ability to purchase the goods and services that you want, to strategize the future that you want for yourself and your family, to strategize how your pension funds are going to work, not necessarily the Alberta pension plan, because there's other ways of financing your retirement. All right, so this point with respect to sovereignty brings up the second key point I want to touch on, which is the Alberta sovereignty within a United Canada Act. Well, what does that really mean? It means the provincial government wants more sovereignty. Sovereignty from whom? From the federal government, obviously. You've heard the Premier say on more than one occasion that she is frustrated and angry about federal usurpation of provincial constitutional authority. And this is what's been occurring ever since, well, the original Wheat Board and then the National Energy Policy and et cetera, et cetera. So we've seen this occur over and over. This issue of the incremental loss of our sovereignty. And by the way, I digress for a moment. If you look at all the recent polls, and if Carney wins and he implements a central bank digital currency, you'll see a lot more of your individual sovereignty gone. They'll be completely controlled. Now, let's touch on the issue of what could the provincial government do to get back some of our sovereignty. And there are 5 things that I want to touch on briefly. And none of these things require a referendum. So let's start off, first of all, with respect to provincial policing. Quebec and Ontario have a provincial police force. So what's happening in Alberta, it's incrementally occurring through the development of sheriffs and marshals in various municipalities. So this is occurring, and this is a component of sovereignty, right? Because with the federal government's control of the RCMP, they can do what? They can take your property. And you might remember David Lametti, who was the former Minister of Justice under Stooge Trudeau, the most recent one, who once said, this is Lametti, he said, Canadians don't have the right to own property. Really? Well, I don't think that's very accurate. So you can see that just the concept of taking control of provincial policing is another form of getting back some of our control, some of our sovereignty, some of our ability to be answerable, because those provincial police will be answerable to the provincial government, not to the federal government. All right, so what's the next thing that the provincial government could do? Well, how about employment insurance? We overfund the employment insurance plan by $1 billion a year. Well, like I said earlier, if we're losing $1 billion a year because we overfund employment insurance, that incrementally takes away again some of your sovereignty. Let's look at the third thing. Provincial tax collection. Well, provincial tax collection is a good one. He who has the gold rules, right? In Quebec, collects corporate and provincial taxes, but not federal taxes. The provincial government in Quebec. In Alberta, our provincial government collects corporate taxes, but we could be collecting personal income tax as well, which sets the stage for taking control of federal taxation. So this would be another notch on our sovereignty belt if we were able to get control of provincial taxation. If we had control of federal taxation, by the way, we would have sovereignty, because we'd be in a position then to say to the federal government, this is what we're willing to pay for. And by the way, we're going to want to do an audit every year to be sure that our contributions are being used the way we want them to. We can contribute our 2% to a military, for example, controlled by the federal government. All right, so the next thing that doesn't require a referendum is immigration. Quebec has control of immigration. We don't have control of immigration. I'm not against immigrants. I think most people are not. But the issue of immigration creates an economic problem. We have a housing shortage as a consequence. Our healthcare system is suffering as a result. Our inefficient healthcare system is compromised as a result. And of course, there are cultural irritants that occur, particularly when immigrants bring their problems from their original country back to Canada, and that creates a problem. So there's a cost and there's a cultural problem that occurs with unfettered immigration, people who are not loyal to Alberta, not loyal to Canada. All right, and then finally, what also does not require a referendum is an Alberta pension plan. Now we're having a referendum, ostensibly, but it wasn't really required because the Premier could have just taken control of and created an Alberta pension plan, but she decided that she was going to go to the public and ask for support for it. So that's well and good, but let's look at it. We give $9 billion a year to the pension plan, we get back $6. So we're ceding $3 billion every year of your sovereignty. I want you to think about when tax dollars are waste, that's your sovereignty. That's what I want you to be thinking about. This is a different way of thinking about overpaying on taxation. But it's important to think about it. Now, if we look at federal transfers, for example, some $60 billion a year that we give to the federal government, and we get back roughly half of that. Well, if you go back to equalization, the national energy policy, equalization and federal transfers, what we're looking at since roughly 1980 is the loss of about $750 billion that's gone to Ottawa, for which we've not received 1 cent of that back. So we've ceded that much sovereignty to the federal government. Now, let's look at, the difficulty in dealing with the federal government. The problem that we have is if you wanted to, for example, fix the Canada Health Act, or you wanted to get out from under Bill C-48, or you wanted to get out from under and prevent a central bank digital currency, or you wanted to do a variety of other things where Alberta has lost control of those areas, then Alberta needs leverage. And it's leverage that we don't have. And let me give you the best example. You'll remember during the Jason Kenney era, we had a referendum. Well, first of all, he commissioned the Fair Deal Panel, right? You all remember the Fair Deal Panel? And there were numerous recommendations that were made. Numerous. And one of them was to end equalization. So Mr. Kenney decided that, well, he was going to have a referendum on ending equalization. And what happened? 62% of Albertans voted to end equalization. And what happened? Nothing. Why? Nothing happened because nothing could happen. Jason Kenney knew that that referendum was a virtue signaling referendum to placate Albertans that are frustrated with the federal government and wanted an end at least to equalization. So why couldn't he do anything about it? Because he had no leverage. He knew he had no leverage. There's really only one way, folks. It could be two, but there's only one legal pathway that we have. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. There's only one legal pathway for Alberta to have leverage in dealing with the federal government and the rest of Canada. And that is if we empower the provincial government, our provincial government, to restructure our relationship with Canada. And what that takes is triggering the Clarity Act. Triggering the Clarity Act occurs consequent to a successful referendum on Alberta sovereignty. Now, for those people who are concerned about Alberta leaving Canada, that a successful referendum doesn't necessarily mean that that will happen. That has to be the intent of the referendum, but the outcome of the referendum is this. What it does is it obligates the federal government and the provinces to negotiate with Alberta. It obligates them legally, okay? There's nothing else that does that. This is, therefore, enhanced leverage that the Alberta government has. It forces, that referendum forces the rest of Canada to negotiate with Alberta. Now, where the real leverage is in the negotiations themselves. The Premier could be saying, these are the things that we want. And particularly if she said, we want control of all tax collection, that would go a long way in creating Alberta sovereignty. But the other provinces would probably want the same thing, right? Very likely. So in a very real way, folks, you know, the whole concept of Alberta sovereignty is related to what you are all willing to do, and whether you are willing also to convince your friends and family that things are not very good in Canada right now, and they could be a whole lot better if we were a sovereign nation unto itself, or we were a sovereign nation within Canada, or perhaps even Alberta 51. One of the most important points to understand for people who do not want Alberta to leave Canada is this. The fourth paragraph of the preamble of the Clarity Act states not only that negotiations are compulsory, but it also says negotiations might lead to secession. The corollary is negotiations might not lead to secession if Alberta gets everything that it wants in those negotiations. With respect to my closing comment, it's simply this, because the following speakers are going to speak to the Alberta Pension Plan, the rationale and the wisdom of an Alberta Pension Plan. I want you to think simply that taking control of our pension is another form of sovereignty. It adds to those 5 things that I mentioned and it helps fulfill the provincial government's wish for greater sovereignty, i.e. Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act. But that successful referendum, though, by the way, could lead to much more. And we do need to get out from under what is very likely going to be a very much more oppressive, pending federal Liberal government based on the polls today. And if you saw them today, Ipsos Reid came out 42% in favor of the Liberals, 36% in favor of the Conservatives. So this is a problem, but not for some people. All right. And that's okay. We're a democracy, and it's okay for people to have dissenting views. But some people don't like to have control of their wealth and affairs. Some people, like those folks, would rather have the central government control every aspect of their life. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Half second. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, this evening. As mentioned, it is my pleasure to be with you. I am so grateful that all of you have attended tonight, and it is my privilege to be able to talk to you, as has been my pension plan. But before I begin, I would like to offer just a few comments about myself and who I am, just so you might have a better understanding of where I come from. As mentioned, I'm from Lloydminster, Alberta, and I graduated from high school some years ago, and then I acquired a degree in economics from the University of Calgary, and I graduated from the university right when the lockdown started. And so, of course, it meant for me, like so many other Canadians across the country and citizens across the world, that we were unable to acquire jobs in our field. And so, as I was looking around for work, I began to drive truck. I hauled grain for a little while. I had my class one out of high school and thought, well, why not? I might as well put it to good use. And so as I was driving and hauling grain, I started a few social media pages in which I would take what was happening on any given particular day, politically especially, and then I would try and make sense of it from an economic perspective, so that more people across the country might have a better understanding of what was happening and what would be the consequences of what was happening. And the Lord blessed it richly and has now allowed me to travel across the province, talking to various Albertans at various town halls about these economic issues, lots of economic issues that are currently facing the province and country at large. And finally, I was just married. My wife is in attendance tonight, just a few months ago. Thank you. And it's been so much fun to be able to travel around with her. It's been so much better than traveling alone, to be entirely honest. And she's been a wonderful, wonderful support. And again, it's our privilege to talk to you tonight. So I'm going to make my speech as brief as I can. And as has been discussed, I'm going to talk to you about the Alberta Pension Plan, or this proposed Alberta Pension Plan. Because you know as well as I know that when this plan is so much as discussed or so much as mentioned, whether online or in person, it sparks immediately this dynamic and often very hot political discussion on both sides of the aisle. The moment this proposed pension is mentioned is the moment that you ignite this roaring fire of a debate or a conversation back and forth. And I think the reason that the discussion is so hot, at least in part, is because the facts are difficult to understand. It's difficult to read up on this pension and other pensions like it. And so I think there is a lot of misunderstanding that is right now floating around in the political spheres that cause us a great deal of grief. And so I thought it best tonight to come before you and talk about a few of these particular points that we hear every time this conversation is mentioned. And I'm going to do my best to try and make sense of these points so that we can better understand the Alberta Pension Plan proposal and the Canadian Pension Plan, and allow then Albertans to make a more informed decision about what they believe the best plan for themselves and their families is. For example, Suppose that a man or a woman decides to mention the Alberta pension plan online. Almost immediately, they are bombarded with accusations or fears that if Alberta had its own pension plan, if Alberta decided to leave the Canadian pension plan, Alberta seniors, or soon-to-be seniors, would see their pension checks, if not reduced significantly, reduced entirely to nothing. The fear is an Alberta pension plan would rip your pension check away. That's the concern. That's the worry. And as far as I'm concerned, I think this is justified. I think it's a legitimate concern. Here is what I mean. You and I are right now living in an inflated economy. We don't need to be economists or analysts to know that. We just have to go to the grocery store or to the gas pumps. We know that the price of living continues to rise. The cost of living continues to increase. Now, for a younger individual, like myself or like your children or grandchildren, we can offset this unfortunate increase in the cost of living, or at least we can try to offset it. We can get more jobs. We can try and work 2 or 3 jobs, or I can pick up more hours at the warehouse or do this and that. I can try and maneuver my workability so that I earn more income and at least a little bit offset the inflation which is raging and has been raging for a few years now. But the same is not true with seniors. Seniors have already worked. They've already worked their entire lives, and they are now supposed to be enjoying retirement. I think it a travesty, I think it a disgrace to see that so many seniors are forced to go back to work to try and make ends meet. I think it's a shame, and I think it's a violation of the commandment that we in this country should watch as so many of our elderly are forced to return to work to try and keep the heat on. But nevertheless, you understand this problem to be true. As the cost of living continues to rise, because the senior has already worked his or her entire life, their income does not rise. It stays steady. It stays stagnant, for the most part. And so what does this mean? It means that as the cost of living continues to increase, as inflation continues to rise, relatively speaking, the senior becomes poorer. $10 today did not buy you, or does not buy you today, what it did 10 or 20 years ago. $100 today doesn't buy what it did 30 years ago. And so as this inflation continues to increase, and it still is increasing, even though we hear a lot about how inflation is down, it's still in the positives. With the senior's income remaining equal or level, all things considered, they are gradually becoming poorer. And so then it makes sense to me that they should be, and we should be, concerned about the Canada pension or the Alberta pension. In this inflated economy, we need every dollar that we can get to live, to enjoy the quality of life that we're supposed to enjoy in this country. And if that pension every month were ripped away from an individual, or if it were reduced even by 50 or 25 or 75%, the consequences would be devastating. So I think it's a good question to ask. Would the Alberta pension plan reduce or remove entirely your Canada pension or your Alberta pension checks? Well, to try and discover the answer, I went looking, I went researching, and I stumbled upon a document online. I stumbled upon the Canada Pension Plan Act. You can read it online, it's available, it's free, and it's a very exciting act to read. And if you have a weekend, you can get through half of it. It's large, but it's there. And in the first few sections of the Act, particularly Section 3, there are rules and regulations that are laid out for a province that wants to leave the Canadian pension plan and form its own pension plan, because the province can do that legally. It does not even actually require the agreement of the other provinces to do so. It has the legal ability to right now declare its intention to start its own pension plan. But no, according to the rules and regulations, if a province wants to leave the Canadian pension plan, it must start its own pension plan. And this pension plan must be, and this is verbatim, comparable in its benefits with the Canadian pension plan. That's what the law says. So I began to think about it. I said, suppose that an Alberta government, whatever color, blue, orange, red, green, whatever, decided to leave the Canadian pension plan and start its own Alberta pension plan. But as it was doing so, it said, we are going to reduce the seniors' pension check by 75%. Would that satisfy the conditions of Section 3 of the Canadian Pension Plan Act? The answer is no. Albertans would not be receiving comparable benefits to what they were with the Canadian pension plan. So too, if the government said, well, we're going to leave the Canadian pension plan and we're going to actually have nothing in its place. Albertans are just going to invest on their own. Legally, would that be allowed? The answer is no, because it violates the rules of Section 3 of the Canadian Pension Plan Act. And so you would see the federal government or the courts step in and they'd say, wait a second, Alberta or Saskatchewan or BC, you can't have your own pension plan if you set it up like that because you are not following the rules of the Act. And of course, more than that, a government which decided to cut seniors' pensions, or at least tried to, would be devastating for their re-election, and rightfully so. I think it's cruel and ridiculous to dare say that what has been promised to seniors and what they have paid into all their entire lives, their working lives, should be ripped away from them in retirement. That's nonsense. And so that satisfied my curiosity. It seems as though the law is rather clear. But of course, even if that's granted, even if it's granted, that perhaps Alberta would, or an Alberta pension plan would, see benefits just like the CPP, the next contention is raised. And this is perhaps the most common, or one of the most common contentions that we hear. And it goes something like this. Commentators online or pundits in person will say, why on earth would Alberta want to leave the Canadian pension plan when right now the Canadian pension plan is performing so marvelously in the world? I don't even know if you need me up here, but and nevertheless, that is the argument. And further, they digress, or they discuss a bit more, and they say, right now the Canadian pension plan is one of the largest pension, or at least public pensions, government pensions, federal pensions, and so on, in the world. Federal is the wrong word, but you know what I'm talking about, in the world. And it receives marvelous rates of return on its investments. Over 10 years on the average, it receives between a 9 and 10% rate of return on its investments. So what would possess us as a people to dare say that we should even consider wanting to leave the Canadian pension plan if it earns such marvelous returns, these 9 or 10% rates of return over 10 years when you look at the average? Now, to answer the question, you have to begin very carefully by discussing a problem with the original statement. You see, when bureaucrats or pundits talk about this 9 or 10% rate of return on investment, I fear that it is too often insinuated in your minds and in mine that because the Canadian pension plan is supposedly performing so marvelously, so too we as individuals, or you as seniors individuals, are performing marvelously as well. I fear that's the insinuation. Is it true? Is it accurate? Well, to answer the question, all we have to do is look at how the Canadian pension plan works. And very simply, it works like this. Workers across Alberta and across the country, except for Quebec, because Quebec never opted into the Canadian pension plan. It has its own pension plan, the Quebec pension plan. Workers across the country, every paycheck, pay money to the Canadian pension plan. And the Canadian pension plan's appetite is voracious. It's hungry. It loves to chew up the money. And so the Canadian pension plan brings in tens of billions of dollars. It's about 55-ish billion. It varies a bit, but we'll say 55 just for ease of mathematics. $55 billion a year is what the Canadian pension plan consumes. Now this, as fast as the Canadian pension plan brings in that money, it sends almost all of it out to seniors, to pensioners. So it brings in the money, and just as quickly it sends it out to those who are collecting their pension checks. So that when all is said and done, there's maybe about a $3-ish billion surplus. There's about $3-ish billion left over. Now, bear in mind, that number will change. That number is changing as soon as next year. But for right now, there's about $3 billion-ish left over when all is said and done. And so what does the Canadian pension plan do with that money? Do they give it back to you in the form of a check at the end of the year? No. Do they give it back to or do they give it to the government? Well, officially, no. No, instead, the Canadian pension plan takes those billions of dollars, $3-ish billion, let's say, and they send it to the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board. They send it to the board, and they tell this Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board to obviously invest it on their behalf. And the CPPIB has been doing this for some time now, year after year, and they have accumulated an asset pile that officially is worth about $700 billion. It's a very large pile, very large pile. And so that's in essence how the CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan, works. That's how, simplified, but simply the Canadian Pension Plan operates. So when we hear bureaucrats or politicians or pundits talk about the 9 or 10% rates of return on the CPP's investment, they are talking about this pile, the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board's rate of return. They are talking about this investment over here. That's what they're discussing. That's what they mean. So the question has to be asked, does the size of this pile, or does the performance of the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board have any bearing whatsoever on your individual performance, on the size of your pension check? Well, there are 3 factors that determine how large your Canadian Pension Plan check is. The first factor is the age at which you decide to pull your pension. Did you pull it at 65? Did you pull it at 70? You waited a bit, or did you pull it early? 63, let's say. What age did you pull your pension? The second factor that has to be accounted for is the amount of money that you contributed to the Canadian Pension Plan while you were working. Did you make a lot of money and so contribute a lot of money to the CPP? Or did you make just a little bit of money and so contribute only a little bit to the CPP? And finally, the last question the CPP asks when determining the size of your pension check is, how long did you work? Did you work for 20 years? Did you work for 30 years? Did you work for 5 years? How long did you work? It is those 3 factors, the age at which you pull your pension, the amount of money you made or contributed to the CPP while working, and the number of years that you worked, that determine the size of your pension check. So we can now ask the question, is there any correlation whatsoever between this equation and the performance of the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board? There is no correlation. No correlation whatsoever. This Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board might earn a 10,000% rate of return one year. Your pension checks would stay the same. Now, similarly, this Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board might earn a negative rate of return on its investments one year. It might do very poorly. Maybe it loses 10,000%. Still yet, your pension checks would stay the same. So if there is an insinuation that the performance of the CPPIB correlates with your individual performance, it's false. It's wrong. The 2 equations are totally different. So then, of course, we can say to ourselves, well, if we have a difference here, what exactly is our performance? How well are we doing with the Canadian Pension Plan? What are my individual rates of return when I retire? So the CPP was started in the 60s, 66, and those who retired in 66 or 67, and so received the first year or 2 of Canadian Pension Plan checks, earned about a 40% rate of return on their investment. Marvelous, miraculous. We'll never see it again. Of course, the only reason that that number was 40% is just because it was the first year or 2 that the Canadian pension plan was in existence. And of course, everyone who retired in, say, 1967 would have been born in 1906 or 1905, and those who were born in 1905 are either now dead, or if they're not dead, they're still in government, and and so their returns don't concern us, really, do they? No, we're concerned about present returns. I'm concerned about future returns. What are they going to be? What are they right now? Well, maybe if they're not 40%, maybe they're 30%. No, they're not 30%. Well, maybe they're 20%, not 20. Okay, maybe they're 10%. You know, like a very, I don't know, conservatively performing mutual fund. That's doing quite well, 10%, not 10%. Maybe 7%, not 7%. No. No, for pensioners coming into the system now, and for a great deal of pensioners already, the average rate of return on your Canadian pension plan checks, expressed as a percentage, is between 2.5% and 4%. I was astonished to see these numbers, because I was told, it was insinuated to me, like to so many other Canadians, that this pension plan was a juggernaut for individuals. I was told without this, we'd be hooped. No hope for the Canadian. That's what the government wants us to believe. But when you look at the actual numbers, they're so much smaller than what we might initially expect. And remember, those earnings, those checks are taxed. How is it possible that you, all your working life, pay a tax to the government, which is what? Or to the CPP. It is a tax. Call it a contribution, whatever. All your life you pay it. And then when you receive it back, it's taxed again. It's nonsense. I do not believe it's right. And I think it's another example of not honoring our parents, our fathers and our mothers. Okay, so all of this then provided. What about an Alberta pension plan? Is there really an economic benefit to be captured with an Alberta pension plan? Is it possible that we have an opportunity right now before us to increase the quality of life of our seniors or families and so on in this province? The answer is yes. There is an opportunity before us. You can read the papers from Fraser Institute. You can read the papers from other economists. There is a benefit that is available for us to have right now. It's before us. It's right here for us to use to increase the quality of our life. And we say, why is that the case? Why is it that an Alberta pension plan could afford us economic benefit? Well, as you know, we have an advantage in this province. We have an Alberta advantage. We are on the average younger than other provinces. We on the average work more than other provinces. And on the average, we are wealthier than other provinces. These three factors are true. And this enables or builds, constructs a habitable ecosystem for an Alberta pension plan to insinuate itself and grow. This Alberta advantage is here right now. And of course, you can look at the data to prove that it's true. Fine, we say. So there is a benefit to be captured. But how large is it? Is it $1? Is it $2? You know, if it's only $5, I'll just save myself the hassle and I'll remain with the CPP and so on. Now, this is a good question. How large is the benefit? And on this particular point, commentators and researchers and so on, economists and analysts, have a disagreement. They're disagreed on the amount of benefit that there is to be captured. They're agreed that there is a benefit. That is, that's practically a uniform agreement. The actual size of the benefit, there they go back and forth. There are some, as you know, like LifeWorks, who estimate a benefit of upwards to $1,400 per person with an Alberta pension plan. Other economists, like Trevor Toombs, say, no, it's actually only X number of hundreds of dollars large. But no one denies that there is a benefit. So let's suppose then we take an average estimate of the benefit that's to be captured for an Albertan per year with an Alberta pension plan of $1,000. Let's say an Alberta pension plan saves an Albertan $1,000 every year on the average. Again, just for simple mathematics. Now, $1,000 is a lot of money It's a lot of money in this economy. You know it and I know it. That's 2 tanks of gas. But it's really so much larger. When you think about a principle that's discussed in elementary economics, when you consider a principle called opportunity cost, the benefit, the saving that could accrue to Albertans actually looks so much larger. Here's what I mean. Here's how I explain it. So, as I mentioned at the start of this speech, I'm just married. I was married, 7 months ago now, so it's actually almost a year. It's flying by. It's been wonderful. But as I was dating my wife, and trying to entice her to marry me, I had to work very hard to do so because she's very pretty and I'm very not. And, and so, I would work my hardest to say, let's get married. And of course, like all other men, one of the things I would do is go for supper with Paige, with my then girlfriend. And so one night I say to her, darling, let's go for supper. I'd like to take you out. And this won't be an ordinary supper. Let's go somewhere really fancy. I have somewhere special planned. And so if you'd like, do feel free to throw on your best dress. I'm going to wear my best dress clothes. And we'll go out for supper. We'll have a nice date. And of course, she was so excited, and I was so excited. And we get in the car, and I pick her up. We get in the car, and I say, all right, you know what? I'm so excited about this dinner that you should close your eyes. Be a surprise when we pull up to the location, hey? And she says, yeah, that sounds great. I'm so excited. So she does, she's covered her eyes, and she's excited, and I'm excited, and we drive around for 5 minutes, and I pull up to the restaurant, and I tell her, Paige, darling, you can open your eyes. And so she does, gasps, and she says, oh, you've taken me to Denny's. And and I love Denny's. Actually, she does too. We both do. The pancakes are perfection. But, usually don't wear a nice outfit to Denny's and so on, but I'm trying to entice her. So we go, and we have pancakes, my favorite, and I get a buttermilk stack and so on, and we enjoy our meal. And then it's time to pay. And so I hand the waitress a $100 bill. Keep the change, I say. The meal was $99, keep the tip. And so, and so I do, and we're driving back to Paige's parents' place, and I say, wasn't that a wonderful, wonderful meal? And she says, oh yes, it was fantastic. What a date. And she says, can you believe it? All of that for only $100. That's all it cost us. And as she said so, I pulled over, and I turned to her and I said, well, hold on a second. We have to think about this for a moment, about the cost of the date. It's true it cost me, or us, explicitly $100. I pulled out my wallet and gave the waitress a $100 bill. But what if we hadn't gone for supper tonight? What if instead, you and I, when we were married, had taken that $100, which we wouldn't have spent, given it to our mutual funds advisor, and had him or her invest it? Well, for the next 10, 20, 30, and 40 years, it would have accrued investment income. So that when you and I retired, darling, we would have had some $2,000-ish to use at our disposal, our free disposal. And so you see, the meal tonight did not cost us $100. It cost us $100 plus the foregone investment income of $2,000 that we would have had if we had invested the money. And so the meal tonight cost us $2,100. And then Paige is my wife is incredibly smart, and she shakes her head and she goes, oh, this is why all of you economists are single. And we went along our merry way. Now, of course, the story is fictional, but the principle is not. The principle says, when looking at a saving or a benefit, it's true you have to look at the initial saving, the $1,000. You must also look at the opportunity cost to make the proper policy. Suppose an Albertan saved $1,000 every year with the Alberta pension plan. That's a lot of money. But if you invest that $1,000 in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, all the way to year 30 or 40, you will have hundreds of thousands of dollars to use at your disposal when you retire, that you otherwise wouldn't have had it have been shoveled off to Ottawa. Or you could take that money and pay off your car quicker. You could do some renovations in the home. You could pay for your child's education. You could do all of these things that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to do because the money would have been sent elsewhere. That is the principle of opportunity cost. And so is there an economic benefit to be captured? Yes, absolutely. Now, unfortunately, I'm running out of time, but of course we'll be here for questions after, and so I want to just very quickly mention this last point for you. The final contention we hear, even if it's granted that these things are true by those who maybe are not so excited or are so interested in an Alberta pension plan, the final contention is this. If Alberta had its own pension plan, there is a very great risk, or there would be a very great risk, that the Alberta government, whatever color it is, blue, red, orange, green, doesn't matter, would control the pension plan. And again, we share this same concern. The last thing I am standing up here advocating for is a pension plan controlled by government. I know the same is true of Mitch. I know the same is true of Dennis. I know the same is true of those who are at the Alberta First pension plan. The last thing they want is a pension. The last thing I want is a pension controlled by government. Why is that the case? Well, you have a pension here. You have a government over here. The purpose of a pension, properly instituted, is really very simple. The purpose of a pension is to earn you money and to make sure the money is there when you retire. That's it. It's to earn you as much money as possible, as wisely as possible, while mitigating risk, so that the money is there for you when you come for it at your retirement. That's all. The purpose of a pension plan is only that. It is not to push a social policy. It is not to pursue diversity or equity or inclusion. It is not to push a government program. The purpose of government is different. Properly instituted. The purpose of government is to serve the people that elected them. It is to serve the nation by moving it in the direction that the people wanted it to go. So right away you can see that the purposes, the reason for the existence of a pension plan and the government, or a government, municipal, federal, provincial, are very different. So suppose then that the government did control the pension plan. You and I can very easily see them taking their left hand or their right hand, moving it behind their back, and taking a few millions of dollars from the coffers and investing it in what is a very poor economic investment, but might be a very profitable political one. What is a few million, or what are a few million dollars for government to spend to guarantee a majority in the next election? What are a few millions of government should they spend to guarantee an extra seat or two in the legislature or the House of Commons? That doesn't earn me money, doesn't earn you money. No, instead that tends to lose money, and lose a lot of it. So we cannot have government operating the pension, and more than that, we cannot have government appointing the board members who operate the pension. Now again, I'm out of time unfortunately, but again, if you would like to discuss this further, please, during the Q&A, ask the question how we think it ought to be instituted, and I'd be happy to delve into the issue further, or at least a proposal further, so we can mitigate this government intervention in these markets. These 3 points satisfied then, fulfilled. 1, would an Alberta pension plan reduce your earnings as a pensioner? The answer is legally no. 2, is there an economic benefit to be captured with an Alberta pension plan, properly instituted? Yes. And 3, would government run the pension? It can't. It won't. And if they tried to, if they were right now saying we want to run it, we wouldn't be advocating for it. Those 3 points satisfied, it is my opinion that this pension plan is a good pension plan. This Alberta pension plan, dare I say, is a necessary step. I think it a critical step. in guaranteeing and helping secure all of the rights and the freedoms and the dignities that you and your children and your grandchildren and your parents and your grandparents deserve. Thank you.
Okay, we're coming up to our third and last speaker tonight. Our last speaker is currently the president of the Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul United Conservative Party Constituency Association. That's not easy to say. He's the president of that constituency association. He's the owner of a well-established sporting goods store in Bonnyville, established since 1989. He is actively involved in political advocacy. He chairs the Alberta First Pension Plan Initiative. He is the CEO and head of the Alberta Prosperity Project. Previously, he served as a key figure in the Take Back Alberta movement. He will be explaining why it is essential that we inform Albertans about the potential benefits of an Albertan pension plan. Which reminds me, a great hockey player, who I think once played in Edmonton, said you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. In other words, if you don't act, nothing will happen. Our last speaker will also be sharing an implementation strategy for bringing an Alberta pension plan to fruition. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mitch Sylvester.
Well, thank you. Such a nice crowd. It's such a pleasure to come all this way to see all these faces. However, we have to understand that it's going to take a lot more faces to get the things done that we need to get done. So I want to thank all the volunteers, first of all. Tremendous job. Thank you very much for everything you do. There's sign-up sheets at the table in the back. Food and drinks over there, and merchandise over in the corner. All the support that you can give us, we would appreciate. We'll get to my first slide. The time is always right to do the right thing. I find it's very hard. A lot of people are finding it very hard to do the right thing. People want to look at what they want to see, and they want to see what's actually happening. And right now, I think it's very key that we see what's actually happening. We want what Quebec has. Quebec has all manner of good things that we don't have. Dennis went over them. And why do you think Quebec has those things? Because they threatened to leave. That was their leverage. They're still here, but they threatened to leave. If Canada decides to give us the same deal as Quebec, I think the conversation's over for a long time. Really, I do. However, there are other steps. There are other steps that we need to take. We need to hear what everybody has to offer, and we're going to do that. We're at a crossroads politically in Canada. We can either go to the left or the right, literally. We have to decide right now how the rest of our future is going to look. And I think that, really, historically speaking, this may be the most important election in the history of the country. We have somebody running for Prime Minister that is hierarchy WEF, and nobody's hiding it. 2 years ago, we couldn't have said that. That's what's going on. And I have to say this, I've been saying this since way back in the TBA days, and it is never going to change. No one is going to rescue us. No politician is going to rescue us. Pierre Poilievre is not going to rescue us. Pierre Poilievre cannot stop transfer payments, will not stop transfer payments. He has to stay Prime Minister. This is the only election where we can actually win both ways. I believe if Carney gets in, I really believe, honest to God, back involved with the history that I've had with politics, and we were key in banning tabulators because we thought they cheated back then, and I have the report in my desk right beside my bed to prove that they did, so don't believe for 1 second that the fixes have been on this federal election.
Why would you bring that?
Why would I bring that up? Because it's very relative. Pardon me? I do have the proof.
Why did you bring it?
I will bring it. I'll share it with you. I'll put it on WF, on our website with Alberta Prosperity. Well, the Premier just passed a rule in Alberta that we're no longer going to have tabulators. Okay? So that's a provincial law. And that's a direct result of the work that we did. So what we're going to talk about tonight is money. This is what this talk is all about. Your money. How it impacts you, how the government spends, or what they do with your money. Right now, we have a government that's got 82 or 83 ethics violations. Any one of which would have brought a government down in the past. So what happens to that money? So we have to decide whether we want them to take our money and use it for what they want to use it for, or it would be better off for us to take care of our own money. This is what's at stake. What's at stake here is the richest real estate in the world. Understand that. There's not a place on earth richer than Alberta. We have everything. The third largest oil reserve in the world, 1.7 trillion barrels of oil, unlimited natural gas, clean water, agriculture, minerals, all that stuff, and we're $100 billion of debt. How does that work? How it works is very simple. We're a colony. They take the money, they siphon it out of the province, and they do other things with it. Let's get to the pension plan, we'll get to the numbers, we'll redo the numbers for a little bit so we understand that. So Dennis Wood, he said we've done $9 billion, we sent $9 billion to the federal government, our seniors take 6. We have a $3 billion overage. Let's look at this like a business plan. Say for example, I'm a business, so I have a business that I get into a buying group, and that buying group does buying for me and makes me a better store. So that's the idea of the federal government. The federal government is to make Canada a better place for each province. That's the idea going in, and that continues to be the idea. So if the deal does not work for my store, I have an option. I can either stay or I don't have to stay. As far as the pension plan is concerned, we pay in $3 billion more a year than we give our seniors. So what happens is that $3 billion actually goes into a fund for us. That fund is for Alberta. That was the deal in the CPP, the original plan. Ontario decided that they were the big player and they did not want to overcontribute, so they put it in the rules that they could take their money, their overcontribution, plus interest, and leave Canada Pension Plan anytime they chose. That's the deal. So that overage, those overcontributions for Alberta, now the number according to LifeWorks report, which is commissioned by the UCP government, says that the federal government owes us $335 billion based on those facts. Now there's controversy over the number, but the formula is very simple. The reason they haven't given us the number is because the number is legit. Bill Morneau, finance minister, is LifeWorks. He totally understands the consequence of that number. He totally understands what it means. If you come out with that number, it's an absolute slam dunk, no-brainer for Alberta to get its own pension. There's 60 years of security there if we don't collect another penny or get another penny's interest based on that number. That number is also 2 years old. So just understand this. Just understand this. That number is 2 years old, so they owe us interest on 335 plus 3 plus 3. That number is probably around 360 or 370 billion. Now the Premier initiated this. The Premier came out and said, this is an absolute no-brainer. Right? She said that in public. She spent $6.7 million advertising this and went nowhere and decided all of a sudden to stop dead cold in her tracks. I have a theory. I don't think the federal government would have been very happy with that. The other theory that I have is that they wouldn't have made it as hard as they have for us to do it if they actually wanted us to do it. So what we have to do is we have to get 300,000 pledges and then collect the signatures in 90 days. And that's a lot of work. It's almost impossible to do. So what we need you to do as a group is if you believe that 300,000 signatures is achievable, which I do, because right now we have 75,000. So we're at 1. If everybody gets 1, we're at 150. Everybody gets 1 more, we're at 300,000. And then everybody gets 1 more, we're at 600,000, which will give us the numbers to do a referendum for sovereignty. So that's how much work we've done, and that's how close we are. Never before in my lifetime has there been an appetite to look into a sovereign Alberta. Now the Premier, when I first met her, she came to Bonneville to do a talk. I was actually supporting Brian Jean. She brought up a sovereign Alberta. At that time, based on where I live, based on what my people do, I thought that that was a great idea. Because what we had was a federal government running out of control and sabotaging everything we do, which I'll get to. So the thing of it is the pathway is very difficult. But you have to sign, and every single person in this room has low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit are brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, all those people that can sign and get us over the top. The other thing that we need is you have to stay involved. We can't just expect you to do this one thing and then go away until we've actually achieved what we need to achieve. And it's going to be a lot more than just getting a pension here. Now, why don't they want us to have a pension? Because it's clear they don't. Because it would give us more independence. Quebec has their own pension, they're on their own pension. They don't want us to be independent. That's very clear by the way they act. This is what happens. This lady is a very famous picture. This lady is a lady that lived in the country for 10 or 12 years before she got to this point. She refused to acknowledge what was happening before her very eyes. She saw the Nazis persecute the Jews starting in 1932. In 1942, 10 years later, she's in a bunker here in Poland, and she got pulled out of that bunker, and that little guy probably wouldn't have made it through the next day. The thing is that even if we don't want to see it, the truth doesn't change. If we're in an awful situation, we have to acknowledge it. That's the point of this video, this song. You have to look at what's actually happening around you, acknowledge it to be true, even if it's inconvenient. Even if it doesn't make you feel very good, even if it scares you, that's the point of it. What they're doing is actually trying to scare you.
How dare you compare the position of the average Albertan to Jews in Poland, amen? That's shameful.
We're not talking about Jews. So the Alberta Charter of Rights. The Alberta Charter of Rights. So I was the chair of the Black Hats as well. So we came out with a new Alberta Charter of Rights to strengthen your rights and freedom act. Because what is the purpose of a Charter of Rights? Does anyone know? The Charter of Rights is to protect the people from government, any government. What we wanted to do is strengthen your rights and freedoms so that the government cannot abuse you. That is what we're doing. What did the government do? We took that to the floor of the AGM. We got 95% of the members to vote for it. And then the bureaucrats got a hold of it. And every lawyer that's in our group that I've discussed this with says we ended up with less rights than we did going in. What's the point of that? More government control. Equalization payments. Alberta makes $16 billion a year worth of equalization payments to the rest of the country. Quebec collects it, we collect none. Opportunity costs. We talked about opportunity cost just a second ago. If we gave them $750 billion since 1980, what does that represent today? How big a number would that be? It would be in the trillions, in the many trillions. Remember, we're $100 billion in debt. Foreign interference is the greatest strategic threat to Canada. Parliament was probed. What were the two things that they probed Parliament on that they didn't want to answer the questions to? Foreign interference and $400 million missing in a slush fund. But they were able to suspend democracy and not have to answer the questions. Is that real? Did that happen? Are we going to acknowledge that that happened? Are we going to pretend that that didn't happen? And that it continues to happen? $7,600 kilograms of fentanyl building product was found in Valley View, Alberta. How much fentanyl do you think that would be? The key to this conversation right here is this. How did that get into the country? And why is it allowed in Canada? Why is that allowed in Canada? Taxes. Look at that list of taxes. Carbon tax, personal tax, corporate tax, goods and services tax, fuel tax, alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, excise, tobacco, cannabis, customs duties, air travelers tax, provincial tax, luxury tax, capital gains tax, land transfer tax, media tax, regulation tax, CPP tax, business tax, estate tax added on top. 65% is what we pay. Never has a population been taxed like that and not gone to war. Never happened. Trump is going to bring a tariff on us of 25%, but we're already paying 60%. And when I went to the grocery store, what are we fighting back with? Well, we're putting higher costs on our food. We're fighting back with the tariff on the food coming into Canada. How does that make sense? Why do they want to do this to us? Because they want us to be poorer. Whether that's inconvenient or not, that's actually the case. What are taxes doing? And they suspended the carbon tax like it never existed. Obviously, they didn't need it. Seems to me that we have to come to grips with the fact that we have to control our taxation, because if the goal is to break Canadians and Albertans, that's the path. What's the other path? Higher mortgage rates. Those are coming. 1% increase in a mortgage rate on a $600,000 house is $500 a month extra. So they're talking about a 1.25% increase in mortgage rates here, coming up really soon. Bill C-293, what's that about? Do you know, I'm from a farming community, so I know, do you know that if there's another emergency, the federal government will be able to come to your farm and seize your land and your livestock to stop the pandemic, whatever that pandemic is. Does that make sense to anyone in the room?
No.
Who is going to manage that herd?
The government.
Farmers are experts at what they do. I know these people. These people measure every ounce of fertilizer. They do every single thing to be as efficient as they can. If someone else took over that farm, they couldn't run it. It wouldn't work. So what's the point of this? Again, this is actually still going through Parliament here. I brought this up at the AGM. The agriculture minister said they do not understand what they're doing. I disagree. They totally understand what they're doing. They totally understand what they're doing. So this is what we've had. Have we been censored? Excessive taxation, we just went through it. During COVID, our freedoms are at risk. I want you to understand something. One step forward, two step backward. That's what we're dealing with. We think we win, we get one step forward, they come back 2 steps the other way. You know what the red flag law is? The red flag law is if you own a gun that you legally acquired, whether it's a long gun, a handgun, any of that kind of gun, if your neighbors can anonymously report you to the authorities, and they can come into your home without a warrant and seize your guns. Broadcasting Act, Online News Act, you know what that's all about. Here's the rest of it. Demand for oil is going up globally, except here. Yolo shuts down $11 billion at Kidman Refinery, an approved project. Here's the thing that they're not telling you. Our Prime Minister, our new Prime Minister, actually destroyed 9,000 hectares of rainforest. So understand, his business did. So understand this. It is not about green. Because what we're trying to do is replace coal with natural gas. So that's a net positive. There's 6 train loads of coal that leave Alberta, that go to Vancouver, where they ship it to China every day. Every day. Here's another problem. Go ahead, Michelle. Just touch it. Okay, so what this is, that's fine. What this is it's the RCMP being questioned. And the question is, how many organized crime families are there in Canada? The answer is 4,000. They asked the question, is that people or is that groups with leaders? And I wanted you to hear it from them, so you didn't hear it from me, but it just didn't work because the sound system, I had my own sound system, but this is a little bit different. Okay, what did they do with their money?
How many, to the RCMP, how many people do you estimate are involved in the production and distribution of fentanyl in Canada? Do you have like a ballpark estimate? Is it 1,000 people? Is it 10,000 people?
I don't have a ballpark figure on it.
So you have no idea how many people could possibly be involved in the fentanyl trade in Canada?
There's a significant group, a significant number of organized crime group, but if you're asking me for a specific number, I can't give you a specific number.
How many organized crime groups are involved?
Over 4,000 organized crime groups in Canada, as assessed by the Criminal Intelligence Service Canada.
4,000 individual organized crime groups, all with their own distinct leadership and membership?
That's correct.
Today, when Canadians are having a hard time feeding themselves, a lot of them are out of work. We have all these people running around in the street that can't make ends meet. We have drug addicts all over the place that need help, and we're spending $11 billion in foreign countries, overseas, on these kind of programs. $200 billion in cancel oil investment. What does that do to our people? It makes us poorer. It doesn't give employment to our kids. During COVID, all the oil workers sat around for 2 full years. Now, even if you don't like Alberta oil and gas, you have to understand it's the largest industry in the country. It employs a lot of people, and it provides a lot of money for all manner of good things that we need. Immigration, Dr. Bogie dealt with this. And now here's the last part. How far away from the truth is that? All political power comes from the barrel of a gun. The Communist Party must command all the guns. That way no guns can ever be used to command the party. So, understand this. Even Catherine McKenna, look what she put underneath that. It's incredible, actually. We must be prepared to defend our sovereignty. not just with military spending, but with a population that is engaged, trained, and ready. That's a Second Amendment there, but that's not in Canada. But at any rate, so understand this. The average Canadian gun owner, the guy with a PAL, of which there's 350,000 of those in Alberta, is 4 times less likely to murder someone than the average person. That's a legit stat. All right, here's the problem. This is all about money. Don't take this personally. Understand this is what the conversation is about. Henry Kissinger said, once the herd accepts mandatory vaccinations, it's game over. They will accept anything. Forcible blood organ donation for the greater good. Or genetically modified children and sterilizing for the greater good. Control sheep minds and you control the herd. Vaccine makers stand to make billions. And many of you in this room are investors. It's a big win. We've developed the herd, and the herd pays us for elimination services, basically. So now, that seems far-fetched, except in light of the fact that right here, there's 6 US states suing Pfizer for not giving the correct information and the information that could have stopped the pandemic. They tried to bury it for 55 years. So now there's 75, right. So now they're trying to take these people apart.
Thank you for being here today. We brought together this press conference to make the following announcement, and that is today Kansas is filing a civil suit against the Pfizer Corporation under the Kansas Consumer Protection Act, seeking enhanced civil monetary penalties, damages, and injunctive relief for misleading and deceptive statements made in marketing its COVID-19 vaccine. Pfizer also violated previous consent judgments with the state of Kansas, in which Pfizer promised never to use deceptive information to market their products. Kansas's case is the first of a multi-state collaboration, with Kansas being the first of 5 states to file suit. Before I go further, let me put this in context. As we all know, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a great deal of panic and anxiety. Many people who were elderly or who suffered from various medical conditions had already died when the vaccines became available. And when that time came, when the vaccines became available, every one of us had to make 2 decisions. Am I going to take the vaccine? And if so, which vaccine will I choose to take? And these decisions were being made in a hurry. In some ways, you could say even being made under duress. In such an environment, it is imperative that Kansans making that decision receive the truth. They needed the truth. All Americans needed the truth. And in multiple respects, Pfizer did not provide the truth. Much of the information in this lawsuit came out as a result of a FOIA lawsuit seeking information from Pfizer that still had not been made public. And it was only a result of that effort that some of the information in this lawsuit is available. I urge everyone to read the 69-page complaint that goes into great detail about the specific statements that were made and the misleading nature of those statements made to Kansas consumers. The following is a quick summary of, I think, some of the 4 most egregious examples of misleading the public in Kansas. Pfizer marketed its vaccine as safe for pregnant women. However, in February of 2021, Pfizer possessed reports for 458 pregnant women who received Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine during pregnancy. More than half of the pregnant women reported an adverse event, and more than 10% reported a miscarriage, many within days of the vaccination. Pfizer also possessed information from its own October 2020 study on pregnancy in rats, indicating that its COVID-19 vaccine was likely linked to infertility, loss of litters, and stillborn offspring. Number 2, safety relating to heart conditions like myocarditis. Pfizer consistently denied any evidence of a connection or safety signal between its COVID-19 vaccine and myocarditis or pericarditis. Indeed, on January 18th, 2023, When asked whether its vaccine caused strokes or myocarditis, Pfizer chairman and CEO Alan Berla stated, quote, "We've not seen a single signal, although we have distributed billions of doses," end quote. A signal that he was referring to as a safety signal, which refers to a negative consequence. However, as Pfizer knew, the United States government, the United States military, foreign governments, and others had found that Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine caused myocarditis and pericarditis. Number 3, effectiveness regarding variants. Pfizer also claimed that its COVID-19 vaccine protected against COVID-19 variants, even though data available at the time showed Pfizer's vaccine was effective less than half the time against variants. Finally, transmission. Pfizer urged Americans to get vaccinated in order to protect their loved ones, clearly indicating a claim that Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccination stopped transmission of COVID-19. Pfizer later admitted that it had never even studied transmission of it after its recipients received the vaccine and whether they could say it stopped transmission. After making these misleading statements, Pfizer also engaged in some censorship attempts. Emails reveal that Pfizer officials coordinated with social media platforms to censor any speech critical of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine safety and effectiveness. It should also be noted that Pfizer elected not to join the federal government's vaccine development program known as Operation Warp Speed and declined that development funding. When asked about that, Pfizer's CEO, Albert Bourla, said Pfizer did not participate in the program in order to, quote, liberate, end quote, Pfizer's scientists and to avoid government oversight of its vaccine development. He also said, quote, "They want reports. I don't want to have any of that," end quote. Referring to they, when he said they, he was referring to the federal government. Pfizer's misleading statements contributed to success in marketing its vaccine in Kansas. By February of 2024, Pfizer had delivered over 3.3 million doses of its vaccine in the state of Kansas. This accounted for over 60% of all vaccine doses given in the state of Kansas. This suit is being filed today, and as I mentioned before, it is part of a multi-state effort in which more suits may follow depending on Pfizer's reaction. But this is about marketing products to the public. As I think most people know, the federal government conferred immunity on the vaccine manufacturers for tort suits seeking damages from injuries they received, but that did not free any of the vaccine manufacturers from their obligation to not mislead the public or make deceptive statements in marketing it. So this is principally about the marketing efforts that were made and how they contradicted what the company knew.
That is the governor, I believe. He goes as far as to say that that drug sterilized people. So understand this. Don't take this personally. This has got nothing to do with you. This is about money. This is about billions and billions of dollars. But what did it do to our economy? What did it do to our children? It did all manner of that kind of stuff. So, like I said, don't take it personally, but that is where we are. They knew in 2020 all the bad things that this gentleman is talking about. It's unfortunate I couldn't play it. All right, so here's where we are. Teresa Town, let's go back. Teresa Town, just now, like within the last 3 months, I saw an article on her that she got caught involved in a group of people that were actually giving vaccines to Inuit babies without parental consent. I want to ask you a question. Don't be hurt. How is that not a crime? How is continuing to steal money from the Canadian people, 82 ethics violation, not a crime? How does that work? So, is anybody in the room a globalist? So the only way that we can take control of that money and that kind of stuff is to centralize it here. We can talk to our MLAs, we see our MLAs all the time. Those people, whoever the definition is, you can define it any way you like, but there is a definition for it. If I call it the deep state, if I call it the bureaucrats, if I call it whatever you want to call it, it is a legitimate group of people that actually spend all their time trying to figure out how to continue to steal your money. And it has to stop. And we have to stop accepting it. So how do we fight back? This is the thing. We need people. I read a novel a long time ago about Athens, and they were all centralized. You understand, in Greece in those days, they all had their own, basically their cities were their countries. So Sparta, Athens, all these places were their own countries. But the thing of it was is that they had a meeting. And in a meeting, one of the gentlemen said, why don't we put red capes on all our slaves so we know who they are? And the reply was, we better not do that. We're going to know how many of them there are, and they'll kill us and take over. So the moral of the story is we don't have to kill anybody, we can just take over. But the whole thing is that our strength is in numbers. The only way that we're going to move forward through this is if we get together and band and do the things that we need to do to make this move forward. The first step would be to bring $335 billion home to Alberta. If we have the courage to get our kids, our friends, and everybody to sign the sheets in the back, take sheets, you can go online, we have a great website, Alberta First Pension, you can go to Alberta Prosperity Project, you can sign up on those websites. The other thing, we need an army. You can't fight a war like this if you have not got an army. This, what's happening to us, is a form of warfare. There's no jackboots, there's no people getting shot, so it's very hard to understand what's happening. But that was the point of my conversation before, and the reason I brought up that slide with that poor woman is because you have to understand, you're seeing with your own eyes, and you have to believe it. How much more evidence do you need? We need everyone in this room to sign people up, to sign yourselves up, and if you could give us some money so that we could go faster, and we're not even talking about a lot of money. If everybody in our group gave us $20, $20, with the number of people we have, we could get this thing over the top. We definitely could. So, again, no one's coming to rescue us. We have to do it ourselves. Talk to the easy people that you know. Sign up. Donate some money to us. Thank you very much.